things that used to be medicine and are now illegal. The year is 1899. You're a parent. Your kid has a cough. Nothing serious, just one of those annoying, persistent ones that won't quit. You take them to the doctor. The doctor, a trained medical professional with a certificate on his wall, writes you a prescription. You pick it up at the pharmacy. You give your child a spoonful before bed. The label says it's safe. The label says it's modern. The label says it's made by Bayer. The label does not tell you what's in it. Today, we're looking at the things that used to be medicine, prescribed by real doctors, manufactured by real companies, taken by real people who had every reason to trust them, and are now either illegal, banned, or looked back on with the kind of horror that makes you want to call your GP just to check they're okay. Let's start with the Bayer one, because I think it sets the tone perfectly. In 1897, a Bayer chemist named Heinrich Dresser synthesized a compound that his company believed would finally solve one of medicine's most embarrassing problems. The problem was morphine. Morphine was the painkiller of choice for most of the 1800s, but doctors had started noticing that patients were becoming, let's say, very enthusiastic about it. Dependent. Addicted. This was bad for business, and also for the patients, technically. Dresser's new compound, they believed, was different. It was stronger than morphine, but, and this was the pitch, non-addictive, completely safe. In fact, when they gave it to test subjects, the subjects reported feeling powerful, heroic even. So Bayer named it after the German word for heroic. They named it heroin. I want to be clear, this was a brand name, a registered trademark, Bayer's heroin, right there on the label, in the same font as their aspirin. It was sold over the counter in 14 countries. It came in lozenges, in syrup form, and yes, specifically marketed as a cough treatment for children. There are original advertisements showing a mother giving a spoonful to a happy-looking kid. The tagline was essentially, "For the whole family." The non-addictive part turned out to be not quite accurate. Bayer lost the trademark to the word heroin in 1919 as part of World War I reparations. It became a generic term. They still make aspirin, though. You've probably got some in your cabinet right now. Same company.
Speaking of things that seemed like a great idea until they very much weren't, let me tell you about Eben Byers. Eben Byers was an American socialite and amateur golf champion in the 1920s. He was wealthy, well-connected, the kind of person who appeared in newspapers for attending parties. In 1927, he injured his arm falling out of a train berth, which is already a very specific way to injure yourself, and his doctor recommended a new tonic that was sweeping fashionable society. It was called Radithor. It was water infused with radium. Now, I want to give some historical context here because radium in the 1920s wasn't understood the way we understand it now. It glowed. It was new. Scientists were excited about it. There was a genuine belief in some quarters that low-level radiation might have energizing, restorative properties. This was wrong, but it wasn't a fringe belief. It was prescribed by doctors and embraced by people who considered themselves modern and scientifically minded. Eben Byers considered himself very modern and scientifically minded. He drank up to 3 bottles of Radithor a day for 3 years, approximately 1,400 bottles total. The radium didn't restore him. It destroyed his bones from the inside. His jaw disintegrated, then parts of his skull. He lost 45 kilograms. A journalist who visited him shortly before his death described him as essentially a skeleton with skin, mentally completely sharp, entirely aware of what was happening to him, just dissolving. He died in 1932. The Wall Street Journal ran a headline about it. The headline was, "The radium water worked fine until his bones fell apart." That's a real headline. Someone wrote that. Someone approved it. I think about it a lot. The man who invented and sold Radithor, by the way, kept selling it for years after Byers made international news. He eventually died of bladder cancer, radiation-related. I'm sure that's a coincidence.
Okay, we need to lighten up slightly. Let's talk about cocaine, because honestly, compared to what we just covered, the cocaine era of medicine is almost charming. From roughly 1860 to about 1910, cocaine was the most versatile drug in the medical cabinet. It had been isolated from coca leaves, found to be a highly effective local anesthetic, which was genuinely useful, and then enthusiastically prescribed for approximately everything else as well. Toothaches, hay fever, depression, exhaustion, sore throats, morphine addiction specifically because doctors noticed that cocaine seemed to reduce morphine cravings, which was true, it did, because it replaced them with cocaine cravings, which was a detail that took a little while to fully land. Merck sold it, Parke-Davis sold it. Parke-Davis, notably, sold a cocaine injection kit with the suggestion that the patient could supply himself at home, which is one of the more extraordinary sentences I've come across while researching this video, and I've read a lot of things I probably shouldn't have. Sigmund Freud wrote an entire paper enthusiastically recommending cocaine for basically everything. He prescribed it to his friend Ernst Fleischl to cure his morphine addiction. Fleischl became severely addicted to cocaine instead, developed full cocaine psychosis, and died at 45. Freud felt genuinely terrible about this. He continued recommending cocaine for several more years regardless, which I think is the most human detail in this entire video. He did eventually stop. He moved on to blaming everything on your mother instead, which is at least less chemically destructive. Right, this next one is where I have to ask YouTube to bear with me, because this one is genuinely dark, and I don't think there's a way to soften it. Walter Freeman was an American neurologist in the mid-20th century. He didn't have surgical training, important detail, but he became the most prolific practitioner of a procedure called the transorbital lobotomy, which he developed in 1945. The procedure involved inserting a modified ice pick through the eye socket into the brain and moving it around to sever connections in the frontal lobe. He could do one in 10 minutes. He did them in his office. He didn't always use anesthetic. Sometimes he used electroconvulsive shock to render patients unconscious first, which is its own sentence. His surgical partner, James Watts, quit in protest. Freeman kept going.
He performed over 3,000 lobotomies. One of his patients was a 12-year-old. Another was Rosemary Kennedy, JFK's sister, lobotomized at 23 on her father's orders because she was considered difficult and emotionally volatile. She spent the next 64 years in institutional care and never recovered. She died in 2005. The thing that I find genuinely hard to sit with is that this wasn't fringe medicine. This was mainstream. The Portuguese neurologist who pioneered the lobotomy, Agus Moniz, won the Nobel Prize for it in 1949. The Nobel Prize. The committee has never rescinded it. I'm just going to leave that there. Freeman's hospital privileges were eventually revoked after his last patient died from a third procedure at Freeman's hands. He spent his remaining years driving around America in a van he called the Lobotomobile. That's real, that's the actual name he used, visiting former patients and writing them letters asking if they were doing well. I don't know what to do with that information. I don't think he did either. Let's come up for air with someone who actually did the right thing, because this video needs it. In 1960, a pharmaceutical company called Richardson Merrill applied to the FDA for approval to sell a drug called thalidomide in the United States. Thalidomide had been on the market in West Germany since 1957, prescribed to pregnant women for morning sickness, and it was selling extremely well across Europe and Australia. The FDA assigned the application to Frances Kelsey. She had been at the FDA for 1 month. Kelsey looked at the data. The data showed the drug worked. It showed it was safe for adults. What it didn't show to her satisfaction was that it was safe for fetuses. The company hadn't adequately tested that. She asked for more data.
The company pushed back. They called her obstructionist, a bureaucratic roadblock, wrote letters complaining about her to her superiors. She had been on the job for 1 month, and a pharmaceutical company was trying to get her fired. She kept asking questions for 19 months. She kept saying no. Meanwhile, in Europe and Australia, approximately 10,000 babies were born with severe limb malformations caused by thalidomide. America was largely spared because one woman, new to her job, with no particular authority beyond the rules she was applying, simply would not sign a form until she was satisfied.
In 1962, President Kennedy gave her the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service. She said, afterwards, that she hadn't been trying to be heroic. She just thought the data was incomplete and couldn't sign off on it in good conscience. She didn't know what was happening in Europe. She just kept asking questions. She worked at the FDA until she was 90 years old. 90! Still asking for more data, presumably. Life is genuinely unfair sometimes, and then sometimes it isn't. Speaking of things that require a content warning, I need to talk about World War II, and I need to talk about a certain compound, and I need to stress very clearly for YouTube's benefit that I am describing historical military policy and not endorsing anything. Both sides, that's the thing. Both sides in World War II issued the same stimulant compound to their soldiers as standard military supply. The German version was called Pervitin. It was developed in 1938, sold over the counter as an alertness and mood enhancement product, and enthusiastically adopted by the military for the 1940 France campaign. The idea was simple. Soldiers on Pervitin didn't need to sleep. The blitzkrieg push through France involved German tank divisions driving for days without stopping, which conventional military thinking said was impossible. It wasn't. It just required chemical assistance. The Allies and American forces had Benzedrine tablets issued in military ration kits. The Japanese military issued their own version to factory workers and, according to some accounts, to kamikaze pilots before missions, which is a detail I find genuinely hard to think about for too long. There was a German military doctor named Otto Ranke who championed Pervitin enthusiastically, wrote reports about how it was transforming soldier performance, pushed hard for its widespread adoption. He became addicted to it himself. His personal diary, which survives, shows increasingly erratic and paranoid thoughts while he was simultaneously writing official reports about the drug's safety and efficacy. He kept writing the endorsements. The diary kept getting stranger. After the war, Japan had a serious epidemic as military stockpiles of the compound flooded the civilian market. Hundreds of thousands of people addicted. The Allies won the war, both sides on the same compound. I don't know what conclusion to draw from that. I'm not sure there is one. And I want to end with the one that I think puts all of this in the sharpest possible focus, because everything we've covered so far happened in the modern era, the 1800s, the 1900s, living memory. This last one, I want you to understand, was the dominant school of mainstream American medicine, practiced by the most respected doctors in the country for the better part of a century. It was called heroic medicine. And the name was sincere. The basic theory, prevalent from roughly 1780 to 1850, was that most diseases were caused by an excess of something in the body. Too much blood, too much bile, too much of whatever the body was producing too much of. The cure, therefore, was to remove as much of it as possible, as violently and quickly as you could, until the patient either improved or stopped being a problem. This meant bleeding, sometimes removing the majority of a patient's blood. It meant purging, blistering, and inducing violent vomiting. It meant doing all of these things simultaneously if the patient seemed to not be improving fast enough. The most prominent advocate of heroic medicine was Benjamin Rush. Dr. Benjamin Rush, signatory of the Declaration of Independence, the father of American psychiatry. His face was on the seal of the American Psychiatric Association until 2015. 2015.
Rush believed that almost every disease could be cured by removing around 80% of a patient's blood. He treated yellow fever epidemics this way. He was considered the greatest physician in America. George Washington died in December 1799 with a throat infection. His doctors treated him with heroic medicine. In approximately 12 hours, they removed an estimated 40% of his blood. Washington reportedly said at some point during the treatment, "I feel myself going," and asked them to stop. They didn't stop. He died that night. He had a throat infection. A modern course of antibiotics would have fixed it in a week. His face was on the Psychiatric Association seal until 2015. His, Benjamin Rush's face, the man whose approach to medicine almost certainly killed the first president of the United States, on the seal of the Psychiatric Association until 2015. I don't know why I find that the most upsetting fact in this entire video. I think it's because everything else, the bare heroin, the radium water, the lobotomies, those feel like history. That seal feels like us not quite being ready to fully reckon with what happened. Anyway, if this video has taught you anything, I hope it's a combination of profound gratitude for modern medicine and mild ongoing suspicion of it, which I think is probably the correct calibration. There's another video on screen right now that I think you'll like. It's a good one. I'm proud of it. Go watch it. And as always, bro, got you.